The preparation room at the funeral home was nothing like what I envisioned as a child. I never thought I would spend my adult life surrounded by death. Yet, there I was, in a chilly, sterile environment with the persistent scent of formaldehyde clinging to my clothing and skin. A space where silence was standard and death was always present. It was an ordinary night, or so I believed as I arrived. I had just finished embalming my last client of the day, an elderly man who had passed away peacefully in his sleep, according to the records. I placed him on the stretcher and transferred him to the preparation room for the final touches of makeup. The process was careful and almost ritualistic, and despite my years of experience, I remained attentive to every detail. However, that night something seemed off. The temperature in the preparation room felt colder than usual, even though the thermostat indicated the same setting as always. I tightened my coat and started arranging my tools when, all of a sudden, the door to the preparation room slammed shut with a force that made me jump. I quickly turned around, expecting to see someone, but no one was there. I attempted to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I assumed it had gotten stuck, something that had happened before, though rarely with such intensity. Minutes went by, and I still couldn't get the door open, so I decided it was best to complete my work first and then find a solution. When I heard the first whisper, a low murmur that sounded almost like someone speaking from a great distance away, I stopped and looked around the room, which was empty except for the corpse. I shook my head, assuming that fatigue was playing tricks on me, and carried on applying makeup. This time, the whispers were more distinct but still incomprehensible. They were undoubtedly words, but I was unable to make them out. A shiver went down my spine, so I took a deep breath and tried to ignore the noises and concentrate on my work. That was the moment when the knocking began. A dull, rhythmic thudding echoing from the door, as if someone on the other side was trying to enter. I approached and pressed my ear against the cold wood, causing the knocking to cease instantly. Returning to the body, my nerves were frayed as the night dragged on. The knocking and whispers grew louder. They seemed to emerge from everywhere, not just the door. I heard them behind me, next to me, even beneath the stretcher. Whenever I attempted to locate the source of the sounds, they shifted, mocking my efforts. Although the old man on the stretcher had his eyes shut and mouth unmoving, it felt as if he was watching me, fully aware of everything happening. The atmosphere became more stifling, the air thicker, making it difficult for me to breathe. I tried to divert my attention with the job at hand, but the whispers became more urgent, allowing me to catch fragmented words, phrases in an unfamiliar language. The knocking turned increasingly aggressive, as if someone were frantic to either enter or escape. My thoughts started to disintegrate. Logic and reason faded into unwarranted terror. I sensed I was not alone, that some other entity shared the room with me. Something invisible that was observing and tracking me. That I attempted to concentrate on the stretcher with the old man lying lifeless, but every time I glanced at his face, it seemed his features had subtly altered. His skin appeared paler, and his lips were more tightly pressed, as if he were on the verge of speaking. I withdrew, unable to endure the sight. Time became meaningless. Minutes or hours could have elapsed. I had no way of knowing. All I was certain of was that the door remained locked, and the knocking and whispers persisted. Desperation surged within me as I struck the door with all my might, shouting for help, but my cries were consumed by the silence of the room. Suddenly, everything ceased. The knocking and even the chill I had felt. The chamber was engulfed in a heavy silence. I turned slowly, fearing what I might find. The old man was still there, lifeless, yet something had shifted. The stretcher was now vacant. A wave of irrational panic washed over me. It couldn't be true. I was convinced I had left him there. I staggered backward until I collided with the door, my eyes darting around the room in search of the body. Then I spotted him, huddled in a corner, shrouded in shadows. The figure of the old man watching me, his eyes wide open and bloodshot, staring intensely. His mouth moved, and a guttural whisper escaped his lips. I couldn't comprehend his words, but I didn't need to. The sheer terror in his voice was sufficient. I tried the door once more in desperation, but it remained immovable. I sensed a presence behind me, drawing nearer. I knew I shouldn't turn, that if I did, whatever was there would claim me. Yet, curiosity and fear overpowered my judgment, and when I finally turned around, the old man was standing right in front of me. His eyes locked onto mine with an unsettling intensity, and his hand raised slowly, a thin finger pointing at the vacant stretcher. Initially, I didn't comprehend. Then, I noticed the body lying on it, my own. A wave of horror swept over me like nothing I had ever felt before. I saw myself, pale and lifeless, eyes shut, mouth slightly ajar. I attempted to scream, but no sound emerged from my throat. My legs buckled, and I crumpled to the floor, unable to pull my gaze from my own corpse. The whispers became louder, growing more overwhelming, the voices of many speaking in unison, all saying the same thing. I didn't belong there. I tried to rise, but my strength deserted me. The old man's figure gradually faded away, leaving nothing but a dark void in his absence. The room darkened further, and I felt the cold seep into my bones. I couldn't tell how long I lingered in that darkness, whether it was minutes or hours, only that I remembered the chill, the whispers, and the moment everything went blank. When I finally regained consciousness, the door stood ajar and the room was deserted. The old man's body had vanished without a trace of what had occurred. I stumbled out of the funeral home, and to this day, the whispers and knocking continue to haunt me. Whenever I close my eyes, I see that old man's face along with my own lifeless body on the stretcher. I have no idea what transpired that night, but one thing is clear. Death keeps its secrets, and some are better left in the shadows. After that night, I resolved to investigate on my own, despite my promise not to. I felt compelled to comprehend what had unfolded. However, each attempt only led me further toward the edge of insanity. The funeral home's files were a labyrinth of names and dates, yet nothing seemed amiss. Still, I stumbled upon a record that piqued my interest. The old man I had prepared that night had no known relatives or close friends. He had lived alone in a secluded house on the town's outskirts, a solitary figure who, according to neighbors, seldom left his home. I went to his house, hoping to uncover a clue. The place was abandoned, cloaked in dust and cobwebs, yet still filled with his belongings. I discovered a padlocked old wooden box in the attic, which I easily broke open to reveal a collection of tattered diaries. The diaries were written by the elderly man and detailed his life, fears, and, most unsettling of all, his encounters with what he called the shadows, who he claimed were entities that followed him, whispering in the dark and knocking on stormy nights. He claimed that the shadows were always there, watching and waiting for the right opportunity to take action, that I found the last diaries to be the most disturbing. In them, the old man talked about a curse a PCT had placed decades earlier. He never went into detail, but he kept saying that the shadows would not let him rest in peace and would follow him even after he died. I left his house feeling burdened and with no clear answers, just more questions. But I knew that what had happened in the preparation room was real. A psychologist who I sought out told me that I had experienced a period of extreme stress during which my mind had produced a different reality to deal with the demands of my job. However, I was not persuaded by what they said. I tried to regain my life over time, finding another job away from death and the funeral home's silence. But the nights were the worst because I knew what I had seen and heard was as real as the air I breathed. People didn't understand what I had been through, and the whispers were always there at the edge of my consciousness. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating and my heart racing, and I was positive that the shadows were in my room. And I couldn't blame them, even though I occasionally questioned my own sanity. I isolated myself, just like the old man did, after hearing a knocking on my bedroom door one night while I was trying to fall asleep. It was a soft but continuous tapping, like someone tapping with their knuckles. I got up slowly, dreadfully, and when I opened the door, there was only the dark hallway. I slammed the door shut, my heart thumping, but the knocking got louder this time. So I turned around, and there, they were, the shadows whispering my name as they formed in the room's corners. Death has its own secrets, and some have chosen to stay with me. Perhaps one day I will find peace, but for now I live knowing the shadows are always watching. On those sleepless nights when there is complete silence and fear is evident, I close my eyes and listen because I know the shadows are always there. Since then, I have lived a half-life, half-dread. The shadows have never left me, always lurking in the corners of my mind, reminding me of that night in the preparation room with every whisper and knock, reminding me that there are things worse than death while whispering my name. I will keep my identity hidden because what I am about to share is neither a fabrication nor a result of an unhinged mind. It is an experience I wish I had never endured, one that still haunts me at night, making sleep elusive as shadows engulf me. It took place in a funeral home, a setting where, despite the pain, one should find peace and a final resting place for those who have departed this life. Yet what I saw there was far from restful. It all started when I secured a position at a funeral home in a small town in the United States. Although I had experience in the funeral industry, this was my first opportunity in a location outside of my hometown. The owner, an elderly man with silver hair and weary eyes, hired me with minimal inquiries. His urgent need for staff and my experience compelled him to accept me without hesitation. The funeral home was situated in an ancient colonial-style house, a structure that appeared as if it had been lifted from another time. The walls were thick and faded to a cream color, while the red-tiled roof seemed to bear centuries of history. However, what struck me most from the beginning was the atmosphere. There was a tangible heaviness in the air, a sense of oppression that made me feel as though I was being watched, even in solitude. My first day involved routine tasks like completing paperwork and getting acquainted with the facility. However, things took a turn on the third day. We were given the remains of a young woman who was no older than 20 and had passed away due to certain circumstances. She was dead, but her lips formed a smile that, far from expressing peace, exuded a profound disturbance. I was unaware of this at the time, but it was what caught my attention. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The individual responsible for getting her ready for the funeral was a quiet man. When Joe saw the young woman's body, his hands trembled slightly, a gesture that made me shudder. She died smiling. Joe's demeanor conveyed his experience with a calmness that suggested he had seen the worst of humanity without flinching. I watched her intently in an attempt to figure out what it was about her that was so unnerving. It was a forced smile, as though her face had been shaped into that expression just before she passed away. I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light, or my fatigue, but as I got closer to the body, I realized I wasn't the only one who noticed Joe visibly disturbed and decided to take a break. Leaving me alone in the preparation room, tried to cover that upsetting grimace with makeup, but every time he applied some foundation to her lips, they seemed to move as if they were trying to form invisible words. My chest began to feel constricted. Perhaps I had dropped it without noticing. However, when I leaned down to retrieve the brush, I noticed it moving on its own, gliding across the floor as if directed by an invisible force. My heart started to thump rapidly, and my legs felt paralyzed. I was ensnared in a mix of fear and wonder. At that instant, the atmosphere in the room thickened, charged with an energy that seemed to pulse around me. The instruments on the table began to quiver, initially slightly, then more vigorously, until one by one, they crashed to the ground with a thunderous clamor. I wanted to let out a scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. That was when I noticed her, the young woman, the deceased girl who should have remained still, sitting on the stretcher with that same distorted smile on her face. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on me with an intensity that burned. I felt as if time had frozen, ensnared in her stare while everything surrounding me lost all meaning. She did not move or say anything, yet her smile expressed more than words ever could. It was a grin from the depths of darkness, from a realm where sanity does not prevail without warning. The light in the room began to flicker, and the cold became unbearable, as if winter itself had settled deep within my bones. Suddenly, everything came to a halt. The lights went out completely, plunging me into total darkness. I could only hear the sound of my ragged breathing and the thudding of my heart. When the lights returned, the young woman was no longer seated. She was lying down again in the same position she had arrived in, but her smile was even more pronounced, more sinister, as if to mock me. I fled the room, trembling from head to toe, feeling as if madness was chasing me. I rushed to the owner's office, where he was taken aback by my condition. I attempted to explain what had taken place, but my words got tangled in my mouth. He looked at me with a blend of concern and something I couldn't identify at the moment. After a while, he reassured me, claiming that what I had witnessed was merely a result of stress, explaining that working in a funeral home is challenging and that our minds often deceive us. Yet, despite his assurance, something in his tone caused me to doubt. I chose to remain there a bit longer. The funeral home attempted to make sense of what had transpired, certain that a logical explanation existed. However, the days that followed brought no solace. The atmosphere became increasingly heavy and oppressive. Joseph, who had been missing since the incident, returned to work but displayed peculiar behavior. He was quieter than normal, avoided making eye contact, and appeared to have aged overnight. He began conversing in hushed tones with the owner, and whenever I entered the room, a silence enveloped us like a shroud. Driven by curiosity, or perhaps a need for answers, I set out to learn more about the young woman. I found out that her death was a suicide, and not just any suicide. She had been discovered in her home, seated in front of a mirror, graced with that haunting smile that followed her even to her funeral. The circumstances surrounding her demise were enigmatic, and the authorities had left the case unresolved, unable to comprehend why someone would choose such an end. As I dug deeper, the more surreal my experiences at the funeral home became. I started hearing whispers at night, voices emerging from shadowy corners, speaking in a tongue I couldn't decipher. The shadows appeared to move independently, and one night, while making my way down the hallway toward the preparation room, I caught sight of her reflection in one of the windows, smiling. I could no longer bear the situation. I resolved to leave before insanity fully consumed me. I submitted my resignation, but the owner, rather than being taken aback, seemed to anticipate my decision. As I gathered my things, he said something that sent chills through me. There are phenomena that defy explanation. Some souls do not attain peace, and this funeral home is a place where they sometimes become trapped. But what you witnessed was not merely a troubled spirit. It was something much more malevolent. I refrained from asking further questions and departed from the funeral home without looking back. Yet even now, as I pen these words, I feel that smile continue to haunt me, as if in some dark recess, she watches and waits for the moment I let my defenses down, ready to pull me back into the abyss from which she should have never escaped. I've attempted to move on and forget, but the memory of what I experienced lingers. Occasionally, in the stillness of the night, when silence reigns, I swear I can hear her soft, mocking laughter, and I realize that no matter where I go, she will forever be with me, lurking in the shadows, smiling for eternity. What I witnessed in that funeral home was undeniably real, and even though many might doubt me, I am certain there exists something beyond death, an enigma we cannot fully grasp and should not attempt to understand. After all, death is meant to bestow peace.